is Albert Campa. My talk's going to be on when a vulnerability assessment is greater than a pen test. So I just want to ask you guys, we're sort of a small group, so you can feel free to ask questions whenever you want. How many of you guys are pen testers or consultants or auditors of some sort? Okay, how many of you do internal security, like you keep your system secure? Okay, and sysadmins, or just work in IT in general? Okay. All right, so I'm going to cover things that'll affect everybody. Of course, pen testing, consultants usually do that, and vulnerability assessments can be done by both consultants or auditors as well as internal security. So we'll go over that in the presentation. So just a little bit over who I am. I work for the Department of Veterans Affairs right now in Austin, Texas. I'm a father, husband. I like soccer or football. I'm a fan of the Mexican League, Mexican national team. Martial arts, and I try to do some jiu-jitsu a little bit. I like Star Wars and geeky stuff like that. The Mexican soccer, always on TV watching that. Jiu-jitsu is a martial art that I try to do. This is actually a picture of, I think it's DEF CON. If you ever go to DEF CON, there's a lot of people, security, InfoSec professionals that do jiu-jitsu, and this is one of their get-togethers. Jeremiah Grossman, if you know, he's pretty well known. He's right there in the bottom. He's actually a black belt, and Christopher Hoff on the left. He works for Juniper. He does a lot of cloud security stuff. So what is a pen test? Pretty much all know what a general pen test is. The steps to doing a pen test, recon. You get to hack stuff. You get to have fun doing all kinds of that, all kinds of advanced techniques. You get to grab whatever you can, keep passwords, maybe you can get some sensitive data, social security numbers, compromise the systems to get all this stuff, and then at the end, of course, report. You just tell the customer, your security isn't good, fix this or fix that, or look what I got, I'm really a good hacker and everything. So we know that, a pen tester isn't exactly this guy right here. He's probably a gamer, as you can tell, but the main thing of what I want to talk about is not to put down pen testers or a pen test, because good pen tests and good pen testers are something that are really important. I'm going to talk more about how to do a really good vulnerability assessment and risk analysis, and really go into in depth in that, and how that can make a pen test even more beneficial. And of course, for pen tests, we know good standards. We have good pen testers out there. A lot of you guys are here. A lot of the speakers are actually really good pen testers that are at this conference. We have the pen test standard that we can refer to in doing pen tests. SANS has a lot of good instructions, white papers. Offensive security, if you want to ever get any training on pen testing, hands-on training, really technical stuff, that's a good website to go to. And of course, they're the makers of Backtrack and what's now Kali Linux. Now, some bad examples. I hear a lot sometimes on social media, on Twitter. Some people will run a scan, print out or export the report from that scan. It'll even have the logo of the scanner, say it's Nessus or Qualys. Hand that to the customer and say, okay, here's your report. That's a bad example of a pen test. Or if a report contains, look what I got. I cracked your passwords. Here's a screenshot of me cracking the passwords. Is that really good information for the customer, or is that just you trying to show off that you're able to crack the passwords easily with John the Ripper? So just try to bring justice to what we're trying to do here. There's even a lot of articles out there. One I found was how not to do a good pen test with some really good steps. And a lot of what we can learn from is from our mistakes, from things that people don't do right, so we can improve. One thing I found really good, I don't know if you guys know Marcus or heard of Marcus Ranum. He works at Tenable Security, I think it was on Nessus, and he posted a pretty good article, and one of the main things that I got out of it was the only favorable or useful outcome of a pen test is the worst one. So it's like going to your customer and providing a service to them, trying to help them, and basically just saying, you know what, customer, whoever you are, your company just isn't good. And that is the result that you want to give your customer. You don't want to give a praise or try to help them out. You just want to say, you're doing things bad, this is all wrong, go and fix it. That's pretty much what Marcus Random sort of was saying, that it's really weird, the whole scenario of pen testing. We're trying to find bad things that people are doing, that they're not doing right in their process and in their internal security. Of course, the attractive things are, hacking. You see conference talks and a lot of good, really information that's really attractive, and there's more than enough information. Not more than enough, but there's a lot of information out there that people talk about that we can learn from and how to do pen testing. Something that I've seen is that reporting is not the best. It's really fun to get in there and try to figure out and troubleshoot on the systems, try to hack and break in with different types of techniques, research techniques. But then it's the end where we have to do reporting, and when we have to write mitigations or advice to the customer, that it's not too fun. It's not too fun to sit down and write a report and tell the customer how they're doing that. But that's something that's really important. It shouldn't be something that's lacking. So Martin Bose, he's actually speaking next door. He gave another little thing that on Twitter. He said that he found a security, company that installed, I don't know what security systems and whatnot in the company, set them up and said, okay, yeah, this is your security systems. When they went to go and to get a pen test, they hired the same company. So there's just things like that maybe aren't the best idea. You want to sort of get the best out of what you're doing from whether it's consultants or people that come in to give advice on types of things like that. And just a story real quick. My wife's actually here to listen to this, but my wife doesn't work in IT or anything, so sometimes I normally don't share anything from work to her, but I was telling her one time how a pen test works, or an audit, or how consultants work, and she told me, well, why don't you have the consultant find the weakness, do the scan, or do the pen test, not only just tell it to the customer, but go on site with the customer and fix it. Maybe patch the systems, implement like IPS, whatever security solution that they need that the pen testers find out. Why don't they go in there and fix that? And I remember a podcast, I think Paul Asadorian from Paul.com, he was talking about just that. When you go and teach someone or tell somebody that they're not doing things right, or that they can do things better, and you tell them how to do it, it's better to let them have that information so that they can do it for themselves. And maybe you can go and you can patch systems, you can go fix, as a pen tester, say you did this. You go and patch their systems, you implement security controls, their configurations, and then when you leave, or unless you're going to stay there permanently as their internal security staff, when you leave, they have to continue that. They might not, get proper turnover. They might not, fully learn, but that's something that they need to learn. They need to learn how to secure the systems and not, have it be done by someone else like a consultant. So usually when you think of vulnerability assessment, what do you think of? Scanning, vulnerability scanning, Nessus. There's a lot of scanners out there. We have Nexpose, Flawless, Nmap. So scanning is like the main part, right? Have you ever had someone say, I'm going to scan you, and then the customer, or even your fellow sysadmins or your IT department say, no, we don't want no scanning done because we found that when you do a Nessus scan on my server here, the hard drive crashes, or the server reboots. So no, we can't have any scanning. So a lot of people don't want people to scan. They don't like it. It's intrusive. And I see that every now and then, but to be truthful, in the scanning that I've done, that it's very rare. The Windows system nowadays, where you can scan it, there'll be a lot of logs that you can tell you're being scanned, but it's not going to crash your system. If it does crash your system, then maybe something's wrong with your system. And I won't tell that straight up to an SA because we'll talk about this later, but the security team and everyone else in IT, the system administrators, the IT managers, need to be friendly. Security isn't in its own little bubble telling people, no, you can't do that, or you got to be secure, and then your SAs, your system admins can't be, security doesn't let us do anything, they're not letting us do their jobs. I was, in my job I'm currently at, when I first started, I've been there since 2007, the previous, pretty much a whole new security team came on. The previous team, they were sort of like that. They had really good knowledge of security, but they didn't mesh well with the other sysadmins, with the other network admins, with everyone else in IT. So all the requests for any type of improvement say like, oh, we want to implement VoIP, voice over IP. Let's get a security approval because that's an important part. We got to make sure it's secure. Security would come back and say, no, VoIP has vulnerabilities. No, it's not. That's rejected. And that's not the way it should really be. We need to all work together, and we need to say, okay, you don't want us to scan? Well, let us do this. Maybe we won't scan with denial of service checks because in most scanning, most scanners, you can check the box that says do not do denial of service or do not do dangerous checks, and you should be fine. You shouldn't say just VoIP, okay, no, denied. You should say, okay, VoIP, let's see what we can do. We can, segregate the VoIP traffic to a different VLAN, to a different, network to keep that secure. So it's not just you're not an island in security. You got to all work together. So to do a vulnerability assessment, scanning is a big part, and these are sort of the things I'm going to talk over. How to do it. Internal or external type scans, credentials, how do IPS or firewalls come into play? Then we have agent-based solutions for patch management, passive type of scanning, if you ever heard of that, we'll talk over that. And then of course active scanning, which is well known. What to do with the results. When you scan, what do you do with results? Reports, how do you do that? And how do you be a team player? So first of all, scan location. Do you do a scan inside of the network or from the outside? There's good ideas to look at both sides of this. You might want to do one outside of the network. I would say that the most important thing to do is inside your network. I try to keep my scanners as close to what I'm scanning as possible, and that if you have a large environment with different segments, different firewalls, even different physical locations, like all across across here, for example, an island in different locations, or across the United States, if you're doing a very large enterprise, you might have to have multiple scanners, and they might have to be in different locations. How are you going to manage all of that? So inside the network, as close to as close to what you're scanning as possible. Distribution of scanners, if you need to do that. You might need an enterprise type solution, and there's plenty of that are out there. Denial of service, a little story on that. If you do distributed scanners, there's an experience I had with a team that set up really cool implementation of distributed Nmap scanners, and they wanted to do a scan that was really large in a large enterprise, and so they set this a lot of scanners. I would say up to maybe 15 to 20 scanners around that was scanned. So they were supposed to scan their own set of subnets to not overlap, but that wasn't the case. It ended up scanning a certain data center that happened to have a firewall, and this firewall had rules that were implemented on it, but it was pretty much allowing all this scan traffic to happen, like ideally you would want to. If you have a firewall that's all of a sudden getting scanned through and it's trying to not deny all this traffic, that firewall CPU could skyrocket, and what happens to the firewall? It could just fall down. So that's sort of what happened in this instance. and it wasn't necessarily trying to deny, it was allowing a lot of it. There might have been a few denies, but it pretty much did cause a denial of service. That's self-inflicted. And you definitely don't want to, we had phone calls left and right, upper management that was up because that was a perimeter firewall that was causing a lot of outage of an entire data center. So and then Nmap, you can use Nmap. This is sort of just a diagram. I was just trying to show, if you have multiple routers, you might have firewalls in place, you might have network devices, network IPS in place that could interfere with what you're trying to do when you're scanning. If you scan through an IPS and it blocks a lot of what your scan is, are your results going to be good? Probably not. So, you might, if you want the external side of this, if you want to do an outside of the network type of scan, then that's probably good, but you got to realize that that's what you're doing and that your results might not be right. If you do get good results, or if you do get, find vulnerabilities, you got to be wary. They might be false positives because of, things being blocked or things not being blocked. If they're true vulnerabilities, then you got a bigger problem on your hand. You got something that might be really severe because even with all your protections that you might have in mind, firewalls, IPS, whatever, you still found something. Why did you find something? You shouldn't have found anything if you're scanning, outside of the network. Okay, exclusion for scanners. This is what I was sort of talking about as well. You want to try to have your scanners excluded from any host IPS. If you ever implement host IPS on your workstations or on your servers, that could potentially block stuff when you're trying to scan. Network IPS, firewalls. You want to have everything wide open as possible when you're doing these internal type of assessments. Okay, credentials. These are a list of what if you have anything else of what kind of credentials you would want to use on a scan, feel free to let me know. Of course, if you have a Windows, majority have Windows desktops, probably some Windows servers, Linux or Unix types of servers. You want to be able to scan with credentials configured. That way you can get inside the system, find out definitely is this Windows server missing this Microsoft patch from January. If it is, the scanner should say, hey, you're missing this Microsoft patch because this DLL is old, or this file is old, or this version that I found in the registry is old. And it's not going to be, it might be because I network scanned it, so it's probably that it's vulnerable. No, this is vulnerable, and it's because of whatever it found internally because of credentials. Same for Linux. It found vulnerability in Red Hat because your package was old. SNMP you can use on network devices like Cisco or Juniper, even printers possibly, and that will return your iOS version or your network device version, and then you can do that with SSH as well. So you're scanning Windows, Linux, and then your network devices. You log in with SSH, you get back you do a show version or a show run, you get back your iOS version. It correlates that with the Cisco bulletin says, okay, you're vulnerable. You can go from there. One thing to be careful with though, I put a link to this, there's a discussion on the Daily Dave mailing list. It was pretty interesting. Dave Itel, he's from Immunity. He posted a question on the dangers of using credentials. They could be captured while they're traversing the network. Different sort of scenarios he put, and that resulted into a pretty good conversation. Some people responded. Ron Gula from Tenable, I think someone from Qualys, and I think a couple other people from various scanning vendors replied to that thread, explaining, okay, yes, there is risks, and this is what we've done to mitigate those risks in scanning. And then there's different, so that's a good thing to be aware of, and you might want to take into consideration some certain things you can do to to prevent those risks that they were talking about. And I think I'll talk about that here in a minute. Actually, in this next slide, I'll talk about that. But before I answered the slide just last minute, because I wanted to sort of show something with credentials. And I brought this up, I think, in a Tenable forum. When you scan, I don't know if you can tell, I use Nessus a lot, so I refer to Nessus. But there's other scanners that hopefully will do the same features and capabilities that what I'm talking about. But when you're running a Nessus scan and you scan a Cisco device, you type in your SSH credentials. It logs into the Cisco device, checks for vulnerabilities. What I found is that it checks for the version of the iOS. So whatever the version is, if it's old and there's a Cisco bulletin that says it's vulnerable, it'll flag it as vulnerable. And this is a screenshot here. I don't know if you can see this, but this is from the Cisco website. It's Cisco iOS software is vulnerable when they're configured for NAT. I had this thing come up on a Cisco device, and the network admin said, yeah, this is a vulnerable OS, but we're not running NAT, so you can't exploit it. So I went and looked at, down here it explains, it says, okay, I verified the iOS that I scanned, it came back to be vulnerable, but there's other, in the Cisco bulletin it says, okay, run these commands to make sure you're running NAT. I ran those commands on a Cisco router or whatever device it was, and they didn't come up the same, so according to this it says that it's not vulnerable. So I went and talked to the guys at Tenable, and I was just trying to, like I was talking earlier, you got to work with your sysadmins, you got to work with your network admins. I was trying to be nice and say, okay, yeah, network admins, they tell me it's not vulnerable. I go to Tenable and I say, yeah, it's not really vulnerable. I mean, it is vulnerable iOS code, but the feature that makes it vulnerable or that makes it exploitable is not enabled. So is it vulnerable? And they came back and said, yeah, it's vulnerable. Who's to say when a network admin goes in there and enables NAT, and then all of a sudden, you can exploit it. You can break into it. So I was sort of looking to some type of modifications to the plugin. But that's fine. If that's something you want to deal with your network admins, then you can internally in your scanner system change that severity or that risk for that plugin to something else. If it's high, you might want to say, okay, we'll just put this one to medium for this certain IP address, for this certain network device. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so back to the credentials. There's solutions for the risks that were talked about when using credentials. You can use SSH keys instead of just typing in SSH credential, username, and password. There's settings automatically that should be configured to use to not send clear text credentials. Another risk was brought up with your scanner. Like, say you have a scanner that's running Windows and it has Nessus on it. That's what you use to scan. Maybe the security team is the one that's managing that system, and the regular Windows sysadmins aren't. They're the ones who patch. Maybe the scanner hasn't been patched in forever. So, that's a vulnerability. Some vendors have appliances. Are there any vulnerabilities in an appliance that a vendor provides you? It's a custom built Linux operating system or whatever it is. Are there any vulnerabilities in that? So if you don't want to risk any type of scanning like that, there's always a passive solution. So if you connect a server to a tap or a span port, you can also detect headers that are crossing the wire. Maybe see Firefox headers go over. You detect Firefox being an old version of Firefox or Chrome, or any other type of network traffic that can be correlated back to vulnerable software, vulnerable operating systems, vulnerable client-side systems such as browsers or Wireshark type of tools. Okay, another important part of scanning is getting exploit information. You guys may have heard of H.D. Moore's law that Joshua Corman came up with. He said a casual attacker power grows at the rate of Metasploit. So if you have an exploit out there that's a Metasploit, that's something that you need to measure, you need to know about, and your scans have to have that intelligence in them. Here's a screenshot from an ESSA scan. It found the vulnerability. I cut it off, I don't know exactly what this one was. But at the bottom you can see, hopefully, it not only identified that the system was vulnerable, but it identified that this vulnerability that was found is, can be exploited, or a public exploit exists, and it can be exploited with Canvas, core impact, Metasploit. Oh, so I guess it's an IE vulnerability. I just saw that right there. So that's something that's really important when you're scanning. You have to have that intelligence. You have to be able to know that you not only found the vulnerability, but it can be exploited. It's not a vulnerability that there's no known exploit out there yet. Another aspect is patch management. I was talking about maybe people don't want you to scan because they bring down systems. A lot of sysadmins, mostly on the Windows side, and nowadays on Red Hat as well, on Linux, use some type of patch management solution. WSUS, SMS, SCCM for Windows, and then in Linux there's the Red Hat satellite server. You can manage your patches. You can see which servers are missing patches. You can deploy patches. So what's the need for a scan? The scan finds that same information when you use credentials. So just some pros for agents. It's near real time. I say near because there's a window whenever an agent's on a Windows system, and it knows what patches are on that Windows system. It goes back and it pings back and tells the management server, okay, this Windows system that I'm managing is missing just one patch. So it does that every however long, whatever the interval is. It tells you. So that's near real time. That's good because you might not be scanning every minute. You might scan every week. You might scan every month. So in that aspect, the agent could be helpful. There's no network traffic. When you scan, people might say, where are you going to saturate our network because of all this scan traffic? Well, the pingbacks from an agent, I slashed out the no because there is network traffic. Maybe not on the same scale. I haven't done any studies on that, but there is. If you have a bunch of agents, hundreds of agents out there, they have to talk to a management server. Of course, if you keep your management server real close, then that lessens the impact. And there's no outages caused by scans. I've never heard of a patch management agent break a system, so that's something that's good. And some cons. Agents may not be installed. They might be corrupted. I've heard a lot of times from the SCCM agent wasn't running or was corrupted after we install it. That's why I haven't gotten any reports on this certain system. So that's something to take into consideration. A platform might not be supported for an agent. There's a Tivoli Endpoint Manager. It's the same thing as WSUS or SCCM. You install it, it tells you what patches are missing. It's an agent on the system. That I think comes out. That's available for Linux. I don't know about certain other systems like Solaris. It might be, but there could be some systems that don't have that. There's printers, of course, aren't going to take an agent. Network devices aren't going to take an agent, and different things like that. So there's some negatives to agents where scanning comes into play. And then certain vulnerabilities can't be found by agents. Default passwords, different printer vulnerabilities. There's DRAC. If you have DRAC and you have some bad configurations on DRAC, there's some vulnerabilities there that an agent wouldn't be able to detect. So agents are good, but that doesn't mean scanning can just go away. So you gotta have teamwork here. You gotta have, I would recommend both. Agents, if you have that, if that's your solution, the sysadmins want to use that, then that's a good solution. There's some validation that you need to do as well with scanning. So working together, give your assurance that, okay, we're gonna run this scan, we're gonna run it safely, we'll run it, not so often, maybe, have little larger intervals than normal, if you need to, but scanning has to be done. There's been some really good improvements in scanning and patch management integration, and this is a screenshot of one in Nessus. So this is a plugin that tells if an endpoint is installed. So you know how I said one of the negatives for patch management is, what if SCCM didn't get installed on all the systems? What if typically endpoint manager was corrupted on 10 systems? I didn't get reports, I don't know what their status is. So if you scan with Nessus, Nessus will go in there and look for big fix, it'll look for whatever patch management you have. It'll come back and tell you, yeah, it's installed, it's good, it's running there, and you can get numbers, you can get reports. If you have 100 servers and you get this thing 55 times, then what's happening? You have 45 systems out there that don't have your patch management installed. And how are you going to know that if you don't scan? So working together, patch management and vulnerability assessment. And here's another one that's really good. It came out in Nessus. Conflicts. What if you do have SCCM or typically endpoint manager installed and it's telling you, okay, yeah, I'm vulnerable here to this MS-13-016. And Nessus scans it using credentials, so it should find the exact same thing, right? Here Nessus reports vulnerable, IBM TEM is not reporting vulnerable. So what's going on there? That might cause a little bit more work. You have to look at the source code for the plugin, see exactly what Tenable's looking for, and then look at what TEM is looking for. What are the exact registry keys, registry entries that it's saying the TEM is looking for, that's the reasoning for it reporting not vulnerable. So the point of this is to do things right. If you're going to scan, let's do it right. Let's do it internally, if possible. External, for just informational purposes. Credentialed as much as you can. Get exploit information and coordinate any exclusions that you need so you can get a scan that's not blocked or not going to be affected in any way that would give you negative results or wrong results. So we gotta coordinate. If you get that reference right there, I don't know if any of you will. If you've seen that movie, which is sort of an old movie, you get it. I'm going to talk over some things. CMDB. How many of you guys have experience with working in a CMDB, your configuration management database? Basically, it holds, I'll have an example coming up. We'll talk about CMDB information from the system admins that they're able to provide. Like I said, we got to work together. The sysadmins have a lot of good information that they need to be able to fix their servers. So that's really valuable. And then of course all the endpoint or the patch management systems. So in integration, we gotta when you get your results from scanning, you have to integrate with a CMD with your assets basically. You have to have asset knowledge. So your CMDB should be the system that has your host name, your IP address, who's the POC, who's the sysadmin for that system, what department is it in maybe. Here's some random example I found, and it's not even a computer system, it's some equipment there. It's got the details of it, the capacity, serial number, the manufacturer, a description of it. So all this information is pretty much your configuration management, and this information has to correlate with your scan data. There should be, you can have a column there that says vulnerabilities on this system, risks that are on this system, and then a list of, what NES is found or what Big Fix or WSUS found. This is admin information. I mentioned the POCs. If you have a system that you find 08067 or you find 100 missing patches on it, who do you contact to fix it? That's where you got to go back. Your scan results aren't going to tell you. So that's where you got to go back and have your organizational information in your CMDB and know who's the POC. A lot of times sysadmins in an organization have downtime windows. They can't just patch a server and reboot it when you say so. So maybe they have a group of servers that they have a scheduled downtime for a certain time of the month. You have to, have that information known so that they'll be able to know, okay, I need my scan data by this certain time so I can do any testing with the patches I need to install. Another thing in this system, which I guess I'll call an integration system, your scan results. What if you provide the scan results to your sysadmins, and they go in there and patch, but you don't know when they patched, you don't know what they patched, so you don't know when to scan again, like do a rescan immediately after. So in this system, there should be an area where they go in there and they check, okay, remediated, I fixed this, I patched this, I fixed this configuration. And that could be a manual process, or they can even just say, security team, rescan this IP, I just fixed a bunch of patches. And then, of course, your scan results will be updated. It'll show maybe no patches vulnerable or no patches, missing, and report that up to this main repository. So basically what I'm talking about is a repository. It's not just seen by the security team. The scan results are not just seen by the security team, but the scan results are seen and integrated with all this other CMDB information, sysadmin information, into some other database. Okay, so you also have, of course, what I was talking about, your patch management information, your satellite server for Linux, your SCCM, WSUS, utility endpoint management. That has to be in this as well. And that's where sort of this, what I was talking about earlier was the conflicts. If your database has all your vulnerabilities found by your scan, and then you also upload all your patches missing from Big Fix, then that should merge together with your scan. And if there are any conflicts, that should be shown. That should be shown to where, okay, should I resolve this? What should I trust, the scanner or the patch management system? So all this data needs to go somewhere. This is sort of the challenge of this of doing this. Where does it go? Do you have an Access database? Do you have some custom application that you write, which take a lot of time? You write a custom application, web application that has a back-end database. It's able to hook into your scanner, pull in the results, hook into your CMDB, pull in all those results, hook into your patch management solution, Big Fix or whatever, pull in all those results, and then you have everything together in one repository for, your enterprise view of what's going on in your network. This is something that's really challenging. So, what do we do with all this? I've had scans where I export spreadsheets, and it's like a contest to see how many rows can Excel hold of vulnerabilities. So that's not going to be useful. What if I have a spreadsheet with 65,000 rows of vulnerabilities, and I give that to an SA? What is he going to do with it? So all this stuff has to go somewhere that's viewable and actionable. So GRC, I don't know if any of you guys have heard of GRC. That's a tool out there that a commercial tool that claims to be able to do this, to be able to solve this, to work with the API that are in scanners and bring in that information, work with Big Fix, bring in all that information, CMDB, asset databases, whatever, bringing all that information into this one repository. Are there any solutions out there, other ones? What's the way to do this? Just another side note here, your scan data isn't just good for trying to fix things, but it's also good for incident response. How are you going to respond to an incident? If you see an attack on your IPS that's trying to attack a vulnerability that when you do a scan doesn't even exist. So if you integrate your IPS logs, like say you have a SIM, you bring in IPS logs, you bring in your Windows logs, your syslog from Linux servers, how does that integrate with your scan data? If it does, then you see an IPS event that comes down for some Microsoft vulnerability, but your scan data says, well, that Microsoft vulnerability doesn't exist. That incident can be just lowered at risk because it's an attack on something that doesn't exist. So integration of other logs to scan data. Reporting. So you have a report, PDF reports that upper management want to see. They want to know what's most important to be able to act on it. I put that there, default passwords. That's a good one. How many default passwords were found from our last scan? If a default password is out there, then a 6-year-old could probably log into that system. So that could be a report that you want to generate on a monthly or weekly basis and say, these are the default passwords that I have. This is a PDF report or whatever type of report, and get things done on these higher priority type issues. And the organization, yourself as an organization, have to decide what's this high priority. I just mentioned default passwords because that's a sort of an obvious one. And then organizational severity scoring. This is another sort of challenge, maybe not as challenging as the vulnerability / cmdb repository that I was talking about, but what is the real risk? Do you just go? Some people they can just go with the risk that's reported by your scanner solution, which is actually pretty good. There's highs, mediums, criticals. You can go with that, and there's really good. They do really good work working on CVSS scores and adjusting that for an in general type of environment. How many of you guys are familiar with CVSS scoring? Okay. So the way that works is, on the left side here, and I'll show a screenshot of the website where they have a calculator for this. It takes a base score of the vulnerability, like this say for example, Java, one of the recent Java vulnerabilities. It takes the base score, it takes a temporal score, and then you can get a final score from adding the environmental metrics. And that's the important part. That's you guys putting your input into what's really vulnerable here. If you have a system that has this vulnerability, what can you provide as far as hosts and assets that would modify that score, that final score? If it's a 10, which is the most high, it's a critical vulnerability, is your environment in some way, shape, or form configured to where you would possibly say that's not a 10, that's an 8, or that's a 4. So that's where this environmental metrics comes into play. So this Java vulnerability that I found came out with a base score of 10, a temporal score of 8.7. So the question is, what's the final score? And here's a screenshot of the NIST website for the CVSS calculator. So you can see here, I have this configured already. This left side is the base score. This part right here is the temporal score, and then up here is environmental. So all of this right here was already scored as a 10. This temporal is changed it to 8.7. This configuration right here changed it to 8.7, and then this right here is what lowered it down to 2.2. So it went from a 10 to a 2.2. So if you look right here, it says organization-specific potential for loss, and I put low light loss. So if you have a server that doesn't have any sensitive information, no PII or social security numbers or whatever, you know, it could just be like a desktop used for printing out mail, like in the mail room, a desktop used just for printing documents. It's a low loss. If you lose that server system, it gets compromised, hacked into, what's your loss? So you can decide that. Percentage of vulnerable systems. If this specific vulnerability only exists on one system, then that could possibly be low. 0 to 25% of my systems even have this vulnerability. Or, you know, there's all kinds of other things that you can do. These are sort of just what they came up with. And in many organizations, you can expand on that. You can add your own calculations and continue growing on, you know, specific scores for your own systems. And of course, reporting, this is just sort of a sample of, you know, what you want to see. As you scan over time, you want to see things get better. You want to see your vulnerabilities go down. Metrics are a good thing. So these kinds of graphs are what management wants to see. They want metrics over time of what your scan results are. So just some reporting things that I thought of. Default credentials. You might want to know what exploits or what vulnerabilities found out there actually have exploits correlated with them that are, you know, publicly known. Any malware type of identification vulnerabilities that are out there. There's even ways for scanners to find the infamous IOCs or indicators of compromise. Configuration auditing, that's something I haven't really talked about, but when you scan, you can do a lot of good things with configuration auditing. CIS hardening guides can be run on systems, on servers. There's different desktop for, you know, FDCC or USGCB types of scans. CIS hardening guides for network devices, Cisco systems. So the purpose of this talk mostly is just, you know, to get everyone to do work and to do it right, to improve what we're scanning for, how we're scanning, the whole process, to improve patch management, to improve integration of our teams, because we are just one whole team, not just security by ourselves, but we're working with sysadmins, network admins, management, everybody. An attempt to consolidate all this data so it's really actionable. You know, customize our risks and do a really good risk assessment for what we are finding in our scans, for what we're finding in our networks. And to work as a team. So are there any questions? Yeah.
I do have one. Do you actually use scanners as a discovery method, as a way of detecting, say, rogue devices? Do you scan, let's say, twice a week to see if somebody is plugging stuff that shouldn't be there?
I do not, but yeah, I do see a need for that. Our environment I work in a government environment, so it's sort of hard to do that. There's a lot of physical security, but yeah, there is a need for certain things to scan, like for wireless APs is one thing that you can scan for. We do have some, in that instance, we do have some other types of notifications through logging that will detect those kinds of things. But right now, currently now, we just do, just a very large, a full scan, full plugins, safe plugins on a continual basis, and that's pretty much it. Sometimes we'll do individual scans, or if an interesting plugin comes out, I'll do a scan like that, but not really. And it might be, I'm not really thinking of a good use case, but it hasn't come to mind on something like that. So.
And another one, when you go through the purchase process and you buy a new product, let's say a printer, a router, a switch, any type of device, do you have as part of the process probably scanning those to run with the scanner before actually putting them into the network?
Yeah, so the example I have for that would be our desktop team. We go through approval process for any type of software or additions like that, and when they buy a new software that goes on a desktop or a new printer or a multifunction device like a fax, all-in-one type of thing, they'll get with us and they'll say, okay, we need a scan for this. I install it on a test system or have it set up here. Scan it real quick and let me see what you find. Is there anything that we need to be concerned of with this? But I guess that's not really the pre-purchase or the type of phase, but that's more like they already.
But it's part of the ongoing
Yeah.
procedure. We purchase the device and before we actually print it.
Exactly.
Let's make sure that, because I remember recently for a personal customer of mine, I bought HP MSA 2000 storage array. I decided to scan it before, and it found a bunch that it was attached. It found default credentials. It found a bunch of stuff that probably would have been missing. I hadn't scanned it.
Yeah, that's something to do. That's going the extra mile. That's where we want to get to. So that's another good idea. Because those things do exist. I know one like the F5 Big IP. That's a good plug-in in Nessus that found SSH, what we call SSH configuration, that you get root access to it, just like that. And there's a Metasploit capability for that as well. Any other questions? All right, that's all I have. Thank you.